Mouse.
Please do not be alarmed by anything you see or hear around you. You are bound to feel some initial ill effects as you've been rescued from certain death at an improbability level of 2 to the power of 267,709 to 1 against, possibly much higher. We are now cruising at a level of 2 to the power of 25,000 to 1 against and falling, and we will be restoring normality as soon as we are sure what is normal anyway. Thank you.
WDRN production and WDRN production staff may be considered complete works of fiction. Any similarity to reality is only due to the dimensional rift in perspective vortex. Please adjust your perspective, vortex, translator devices for enjoyable listening pleasure. WDRN can take no responsibility for improperly adjusted perspective vortex translations and currently operating at the frequency of somatic 900 megahertz.
Hey y'all, it's using the agenda here. If you're an independent journalist struggling to get your story out, contact one of our mediators in our chat room for review. Get your story featured on the Hawk Ethernet Radio, part of the Wiki Develops Radio Network. Last submission guidelines: video or portion must not be longer than 3 minutes. Only be played with a startup point of 3 minutes. All material submitted to WDRN is the sole responsibility of the submitter. All content is fair use practice. With your help, WDRN will rise to the top of all available news networks. This has been Defusing the Agenda.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, I got things on. A little blurry. I'm normally more in focus than that. I'm sorry. But hey, listen, deal with it. Let's see here. No, it didn't go through. Just a second. Let me get the changes done here. All right, that should do it. Oh no, it's not liking to upload. Oh, there we go. All right, so what's going on? It's real simple. We've kept Cheeky Monkey in the dark and busy and things like that. He's upset about that. Oh, I love fucking with them. And they think that I use ChatGPT in order to come up with case law and stuff like that. Completely wrong, folks. Do not do that. I haven't done it. Don't you? You need to physically, every single case submitted, you have to what? Verify it manually yourself. Don't be dependent on ChatGPT to do a damn thing. You got to go through every single word. Now, that's the best I'm going to give you for video. Let's see here. Here's both sides of the story as, well, as vicious as it gets.
Got it. Here's the strongest prosecutor rebuttal I can make against your final motion to dismiss, followed by the judge-style weak points, what I'd be most likely to deny or trim, and then surgical fixes you can do without changing the core structure. Number 1, prosecutor's strongest rebuttal, what they'll argue. A, this is the wrong vehicle, premature. Rule 12b2 attacks defects in the charging instrument. But the state will argue, a summons/citation can be a valid charging document in county court misdemeanors. And if the DA hasn't filed a separate complaint yet, the remedy is not automatic dismissal with prejudice. The court can simply order the state to file a proper complaint or clarify the record. B, even minimal language can be enough at this stage. They'll argue the statute following gives basic notice, and anything more belongs in discovery, a motion for bill of particulars, or trial proof, not a facial dismissal. C, you're importing facts to defeat probable cause. They'll say, a 12b2 style challenge looks at whether the charge can state an offense, not whether your explanation is true. Your exhibits are factual rebuttal, better suited to suppression, trial, or a motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause if your court allows that route. Some do, some don't, depending on posture. D, the police report supports intent, not
Wow. That's all right. We'll go to the next step here. Right here. Basically, I win, is what it says. But there is some openings for the prosecutor to argue, except they're all weak.
Below is a Colorado-style motion for Bill of Particulars with a Particulars Requested section that tracks...
Yeah, that wasn't it. That's all right. We'll try to play this other one. Here, let me reload it for you so maybe it'll play. Yeah, basically yes, WTT. And again, I have no idea what your real hook is, man. Okay, out of all the people that come in here, you really have been rooting for both sides for a long time. It makes me a little bit weirded out.
Got it. Here's the strongest prosecutor rebuttal I can make against your final motion to dismiss, followed by the judge-style weak points, what I'd be most likely to deny or trim, and then surgical fixes you can do without changing the core structure. Number 1, prosecutor's strongest rebuttal, what they'll argue. A12B2 attacks defects in the charging instrument, but the state will argue a summons citation can be a valid charging document in county court misdemeanors. And if the DA hasn't filed a separate complaint yet, the remedy is not automatic dismissal with prejudice. The court can simply order the state to file a proper complaint or clarify the record. B, even minimal language can be enough at this stage. They'll argue the statute following gives basic notice and anything more belongs in discovery, a motion for Bill of Particulars, or trial proof, not a facial dismissal. C, you're importing facts to defeat probable cause. They'll say a 12B2 style challenge looks at whether the charge can state an offense, not whether your explanation is true. Your exhibits are factual rebuttal, better suited to suppression, trial, or a motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause if your court allows that route. Some do, some don't, depending on posture. D, the police report supports intent, not defeats it. This is the most dangerous counter if the report says anything like, complainant reported being followed, complainant expressed fear, concern, police perceived conduct as harassing, any statement implying you intended contact after being discouraged. Even if your intent was service, the state will frame intent as, he intended to follow, he knew it was unwanted. That satisfies intent to annoy/alarm. E, civil dismissal proves nothing here. Prosecutor will argue civil dismissal is not proof of anything in a criminal case. Different standards, different issues, and it risks confusing the record. They may ask the judge to disregard paragraph 6 entirely as irrelevant. F, your appearance of intimidation retaliation is argument, not fact. They'll say you're accusing the prosecution of bad faith without evidence. They may argue it's inflammatory and should be stricken or ignored. G, the First Amendment paragraph is overbroad. Supreme Court has held. They'll argue you're making a sweeping constitutional claim without tying it to a specific controlling authority or a clear legal test that applies to this statute. Have 2, if I'm the judge, what won't make it, or what I'd narrow, strong, likely to survive as written. 1, attack on the charging language being too bare, statute plus following. That's a legitimate notice elements argument. 2, specific intent requirement. You correctly emphasize it's not strict liability. Fragile, I might deny or require you to reframe. 1, paragraph 2, fatal omission must be dismissed. If Colorado procedure allows a summons citation as the charging instrument, I may say, not fatal, state may proceed or may be ordered to clarify file complaint. 2, paragraph 3 to 5, exhibits prove no intent. I might say that goes to the merits, not a facial defect. Still useful, but not always proper as the primary basis for 12B2. 3, paragraph 6, civil case dismissal. I would likely treat it as low relevance and potentially prejudicial confusing. I might let it stay, but it's the easiest target for the prosecutor to knock out. 4, paragraph 7, appearance of intimidation retaliation. As a judge, I'm sensitive to that line, not because it's impossible, because it sounds like a bad faith accusation without proof. I may ignore it or tell you to rephrase it as appearance of unfairness, due process concern, not retaliation. 5. Paragraph 8, First Amendment. This paragraph can be kept, but as written, it's vulnerable because it's too broad and reads like a constitutional essay. Judges prefer protected petitioning activity plus lack of unlawful intent plus narrow point about chilling. Namerstar 3. The one edit I would strongly recommend, your paragraph 4 quote issue. In your earlier draft, you quoted the police report as saying you believed complainant would accept service. If your report does not literally say that, do not quote it that way. Instead, safely phrase it as, the report states defendant attempted to serve civil papers and believed he could effect service at the police department or believed the complainant was evading service. This keeps your credibility intact. 4. Your paragraph 7 line. Appearance of intimidation, retaliation. Keep the punch, reduce the risk. You wrote, open quote, creates at minimum an objective appearance of intimidation or retaliation. Close quote. That's punchy, but it invites the prosecutor to say you're accusing them of misconduct. If you want maximum judge acceptability while keeping the sting, I change just that phrase to, open quote, creates an objective appearance of unfairness and improper leverage inconsistent with due process. Close quote. So the paragraph becomes, open quote, the lack of a formal complaint is prejudicial. When combined with the uncertainty as to whether the state intends to alter or substitute charges, the delay amplifies the procedural prejudice against defendant and creates an objective appearance of unfairness and improper leverage inconsistent with due process. No supporting evidence exists in the report or logs, and no probable cause statement has been filed. Close quote, same impact, less you're accusing us energy. 5. If I'm screening this motion right before filing, my judge outcome prediction. Most likely ruling, denied without prejudice or partially granted as to relief. The judge may say, 1, the court is not dismissing with prejudice today, but 2, the state must file, clarify a proper charging document by X date, and or 3, if the state fails, dismissal may follow. What you can do to increase your odds, add an alternate remedy request in your wherefore. Instead of only dismiss with prejudice, include, or, in the alternative, order the people to file a complaint stating the essential facts constituting the offense within days, or the case be dismissed. That makes you look maximally reasonable and gives the judge an off-ramp. 6. Small surgical improvements. No rewrites, just tightening. A. Paragraph 2. Soften fatal slightly so it doesn't overclaim. Replace this omission is fatal with this omission fails to provide constitutionally adequate notice and fails to allege the essential elements. B. Paragraph 6. Keep it, but make it clearly context, not proof. Add one clause. While not dispositive here, it is relevant context showing the same complainant previously failed to sustain the same factual narrative. Paragraph 8. Narrow the First Amendment claim. Replace the Supreme Court has held sentence with something tighter. The First Amendment protects access to courts and lawful petitioning activity. Criminalizing lawful service-related conduct absent unlawful intent risks chilling protected activity. You can save the heavy constitutional citations for your response brief later. Bottom line, your motion is strongest on element notice failure, statute plus following is thin, specific intent, delay plus lack of filed complaint as a due process pressure point. Your biggest vulnerabilities are the with prejudice demand with no alternative, any inaccurate quote from the police report, retaliation, intimidation framing, better as unfairness, improper leverage, civil dismissal as proof, keep as context only. If you want, paste just your Section 2 wherefore, and I'll give you the most judge-friendly version that still keeps your edge, without changing the rest.
So that's about it, folks. Have a good one. May your God be with you. Again, I'm pretty sure I got this. I mean, yeah, I threw in the kitchen sink and everything, but I want everything to be on record, if they do just toss it out, okay, I want still to be a record of everything that happened and all the considerations. I don't want it to have been a step we never got to that would actually create the record in my benefit. So yes, I did throw in the kitchen sink. And yes, I gave them some low-hanging fruit to be able to argue, okay, not to grant it, to deny it. If I don't give them an argument, then they're going to choose the argument. And then that runs the risk of me losing, don't it? So I've got a couple of arguments they have there. But it doesn't take away from the primary argument that they've had me come to court twice already without a charging document, and I have been under the restrictions and the conditions of bail all this time, and the conditions of the court, and there's no justification for it. That is my strongest argument. Y'all have a good one. May God be with you. Later. We're going to have music now. Well, story time anyway. Rewind it all you like, folks. It's all out there. You'll be able to find it. Cheeky Monkey, I think I posted the entire thing over there because I gave him one version and he sat there and spent all his time looking everything up. And I knew that, it's easier to do that and keep him busy than it is in order to deal with him. So I gave him that, but I also gave him the revised version, I think. Let's see here. Woof, woof, woof. Stop yelling. Please don't yell. Thank you. Good boy. Good boy. Yeah, that's what I'm doing, dude. That's how I arrange this. That's how I set them up. That's how I knock them down. You freaking bet.
Light in impossible ways. When she moved, she chimed softly like wind through glass tubes. Her people, the Solari, were known throughout the galaxy as master tacticians who could calculate battlefield probabilities in real time. Then there was Ryan. Human. Brown hair. Brown eyes, average height. Slightly out of regulation on his last fitness test. He had joined the Marines because college was expensive, and his recruiter had promised he'd see the world. Technically, he supposed this counted. "Tell me, Human Ryan," Commander Thal said during their first group meeting. "What survival training has your species provided for this mission?" "Standard stuff," Ryan replied. "Basic wilderness survival, cold weather training, desert operations. Did a course on edible plants once." The other species exchanged looks that didn't require translation. Dr. Finn made a note on her data pad that sounded distinctly concerned. "Perhaps you misunderstand the nature of our destination," Captain Vore said, his translator giving his voice a metallic edge. "Mortis 7 is classified as a Class 9 death world. The gravity alone will crush most biological forms. The atmosphere requires specialized breathing apparatus. The local fauna are uniformly predatory and highly aggressive. And that's just the first day," Lieutenant Kem added, her crystalline voice tinkling with what might have been amusement. "The weather patterns include acid precipitation, electrical storms that can fry most technology, and temperature swings that have been known to shatter military-grade equipment." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like camping in Scotland, I beg your pardon." Dr. Finn leaned forward, her translation device humming with confusion. "Scottish Highlands. Went there on leave once. Rained sideways for 3 days straight. Couldn't start a fire. And something that might have been a sheep kept trying to eat my tent. This sounds similar but with better weather reports." Commander Thal's scales shifted to a deep purple color. "Human Ryan, I believe you do not fully comprehend the severity of our situation. Mortis 7 has a mortality rate of 47% for fully equipped, technologically enhanced military personnel. That's better than the highway I grew up on," Ryan said cheerfully. "What's the food situation like?" The question seemed to break something in the group dynamic. Captain Vor's forearms gestured in what Ryan was learning meant either extreme agitation or the insect equivalent of throwing hands in the air. Dr. Finn made several more concerned notes. Lieutenant Kem's crystalline structure dimmed noticeably. The food situation, Commander Thal said slowly, is that most organic matter on Mortis 7 is either poisonous, carnivorous, or both. Standard protocol requires sealed nutrition packets and purified water supplies. Right, so like MREs, but probably better tasting, Ryan said. Do they have hot sauce in space? Because I packed some, but I wasn't sure about customs regulations for interplanetary travel. Hot sauce? Dr. Finn's translation device made a sound like a confused whale. Spicy food enhancer. Makes everything taste better. Pretty standard human thing. The meeting devolved from there. Ryan found himself answering increasingly detailed questions about human dietary habits, environmental tolerances, and survival instincts. Each answer seemed to make his fellow trainees more concerned rather than less. Let me understand this correctly, Lieutenant Kem said finally, her crystal form now barely glowing. Your species regularly consumes plants that cause physical pain for pleasure? Hot peppers, yeah. Some people compete to see who can eat the spiciest ones. It's fun. And you intentionally expose yourselves to extreme temperatures for recreation? Saunas, ice fishing, desert hiking. Builds character. And you consider it normal to coexist with predatory animals? Dogs are descended from wolves, cats are just small tigers, and my neighbor has a pet snake. Pretty standard stuff. Commander Thal's scales had gone through several color changes and settled on a sickly yellow-green. Perhaps we should review the mission parameters once more. But Ryan was already thinking about other things. He wondered if the space food would be any good, whether the gravity would help or hurt his bad knee, and if anyone had remembered to pack playing cards for the downtime. This was shaping up to be the most interesting assignment he'd ever had. The transport ship hummed quietly through space, carrying them toward Mortis 7 and what the galaxy considered the ultimate test of survival. Ryan Walsh, completely unaware that he was about to redefine several species' understanding of the word dangerous, settled in for the journey and wondered if anyone would mind if he made some coffee. The landing shuttle shook like a paint mixer full of rocks. Through the small porthole, Ryan could see Mortis 7 growing larger, its surface a swirling mass of angry clouds, jagged mountains, and what looked like several different weather systems having a fight. Lightning crackled between the clouds in colors that hurt to look at directly. Final approach to Surface Base Alpha, the pilot announced through the intercom. His voice carried the tone of someone who had made this trip many times and never gotten used to it. All personnel prepare for hostile environment protocols. Around him, Ryan's fellow trainees were going through pre-landing checklists that looked more complicated than launching a space shuttle. Commander Thal was sealing himself into what appeared to be a full environmental suit with its own life support system. Dr. Finn was testing a breathing apparatus that covered most of her head and made her look like a deep-sea diver. Captain Vor was strapping on an exoskeleton that doubled his already impressive size, while Lieutenant Kem had activated some kind of energy shield that made the air around her shimmer like heat waves. Ryan checked his own gear. Standard issue uniform, combat boots, and a backpack containing basic supplies. He had left most of his heavy equipment in storage, figuring he could always get it later if needed. Human Ryan, Commander Thal's voice came through his suit's external speakers. Where is your environmental protection? I've got a jacket, Ryan said, patting his backpack. Weather report said it might rain. The rain is sulfuric acid. Oh. Ryan considered this. Is it strong acid or just sort of acidic? Because I worked at a battery factory one summer and you get used to it. The shuttle touched down with a thud that rattled everyone's teeth. Through the porthole, Ryan could see the surface of Mortis 7 for the first time. It looked like someone had taken all the worst parts of every hostile environment on Earth and mixed them together, with a few things that Earth had been lucky enough to avoid. The gravity hit him the moment the airlock opened. It felt like someone had filled his backpack with bowling balls, but it wasn't unbearable. Heavy, sure, but he'd carried heavier loads during training exercises. The air tasted metallic and sharp like breathing in a thunderstorm, but his lungs adapted after a few breaths. Around him, his fellow trainees were struggling. Commander Thal's powered suit whined under the increased gravity load. Dr. Finn was breathing heavily through her apparatus, and even with mechanical assistance, each step looked like an effort. Captain Vor's exoskeleton was handling the gravity, but Ryan could see stress fractures already forming in the metal joints. Lieutenant Kem's energy shield flickered occasionally, and her crystal form seemed dimmer than usual. The base camp looked like a military installation designed by someone who expected to be attacked by the planet itself. Everything was reinforced, sealed, and built to withstand impacts that would level a normal building. Warning signs covered every surface, written in 12 different languages and 3 different mathematical systems. "Welcome to hell," muttered the base commander, a grizzled veteran from the Draknari military. "I'm Colonel Reeves. I've been running this nightmare for 6 months, and I've seen things that would make a combat medic quit and become a florist." He led them through the orientation briefing, which was less of a briefing and more of a very long list of things that could kill them. The local fauna included pack hunting plants, predators that could phase through solid matter, insects the size of small aircraft, and something called a phase bear that could apparently teleport and had a taste for anything that moved. "The weather is equally hostile," Colonel Reeves continued. "Acid rain every Tuesday and Friday, electrical storms that can fry any unshielded electronics, temperature swings from -40 to +60 degrees Celsius sometimes within the same hour, and wind patterns that include actual tornadoes made of superheated plasma." Commander Thal's scales had gone a color that Ryan was learning meant deeply concerned. Dr. Finn was taking notes so rapidly that her datapad was smoking. Captain Vor had stopped moving entirely except for the occasional twitch of his antennae. Lieutenant Kem's crystal form was now barely visible, as if she was trying to fade out of existence entirely. "Questions?" Colonel Reeves asked. Ryan raised his hand. "Is there a cafeteria? And do you happen to have any hot sauce?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually preceded either laughter or violence. Colonel Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then checked his datapad. "You're the human," he said finally. "That's me. Son, the cafeteria is in Building C, but I should warn you that the food is designed for maximum nutrition and minimum taste. As for hot sauce," he paused, looking thoughtful. "Actually, yes. The previous human left behind a bottle of something called Carolina Reaper sauce, with a note saying it might be useful for equipment maintenance." "Perfect," Ryan said cheerfully. "When do we start the fun stuff?" "Fun stuff?" Colonel Reeves repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "Son, this is survival training. The objective is to not die." "Right, but what do we do for fun when we're not trying to not die?" The question seemed to break something fundamental in the room's atmosphere. Ryan noticed that his fellow trainees were all staring at him, with expressions that ranged from horror to fascination. Colonel Reeves made a note on his datapad that looked distinctly medical in nature. "Let's start with a basic perimeter walk," the colonel said finally, "just to get everyone acclimated to the environment." The perimeter walk was where things got interesting. The moment they stepped outside the base's protective barriers, Mortis 7 made its intentions clear. The air itself seemed hungry, carrying sounds that suggested large, unfriendly things moving just out of sight. The ground was uneven and treacherous, with patches that looked solid, but gave way to reveal pits lined with something that moved and glistened unpleasantly. Commander Thal's environmental suit was working overtime, its air scrubbers running constantly and its radiation detectors clicking like an angry insect. Dr. Finn's breathing apparatus fogged up regularly, forcing her to stop and clear it. Captain Vor's exoskeleton was making concerning mechanical noises, and Lieutenant Kem's energy shield was flickering more frequently. Ryan, meanwhile, was looking around with the expression of someone seeing a new neighborhood for the first time. He had unzipped his jacket because the air felt pleasantly cool, and he was walking with the easy gait of someone taking a casual stroll. "The flora here is particularly aggressive," Colonel Reeves explained, pointing to what looked like a normal patch of grass. "Those are razor grass. Each blade can cut through military-grade body armor." "Neat," Ryan said, kneeling down to get a closer look. "It's like nature's version of a lawnmower blade. Don't touch it." 3 voices shouted at once. "Oh, right." Ryan stood up, brushing off his knees. "Good thing I didn't lean on it." A sound like a steam engine mixed with a chainsaw echoed from the nearby tree line. Colonel Reeves immediately gestured for everyone to freeze. "Phase bear," he whispered. "Nobody move. They hunt by detecting motion and thermal signatures." Everyone went completely still. Ryan could hear his fellow trainees' breathing apparatus and mechanical systems running at minimum power. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the unmistakable noise of something very large moving through vegetation that was fighting back. Ryan stood perfectly still for about 30 seconds, then turned his head slightly to get a better look at whatever was making the noise. "I said don't move," Colonel Reeves hissed. "Sorry," Ryan whispered back. "I've just never seen a phase bear before." "Do they actually phase, or is it more like camouflage?" The question was answered when a creature the size of a small truck materialized 20 feet away, apparently having teleported from somewhere else entirely. It looked like someone had crossed a grizzly bear with a pile of living shadow and given it too many teeth. Its eyes were the color of fresh blood, and when it opened its mouth, reality seemed to bend slightly around its fangs. Ryan's fellow trainees collectively stopped breathing. Several pieces of equipment shut down entirely rather than risk making noise. "Wow," Ryan said in what he probably thought was a whisper, but was actually audible to everyone present. "That's actually pretty cool. Does it hunt in packs, or is it more of a solitary predator?" The phase bear turned its attention directly to Ryan, tilted its massive head, and made a sound like a question mark carved out of nightmares. Ryan waved. 2 weeks into the training program, Colonel Reeves had developed a nervous twitch in his left eye and had started requesting additional psychiatric support staff. The official incident reports were stacking up like cordwood, each one stranger than the last. Day 3 had involved crossing what the locals called the Singing Valley, where the ground was riddled with gas pockets that exploded randomly with enough force to launch a person into orbit. Standard protocol required full bomb disposal suits, seismic detectors, and a minimum team of 12 specialists with emergency medical support on standby. Commander, Thal had needed 3 days to recalibrate his environmental suit after the gas explosions kept triggering his emergency protocols. Dr. Finn had suffered what her species considered a minor nervous breakdown when her seismic detector started reading like a disco ball. Captain Vor's exoskeleton had been repaired 4 times, and Lieutenant Kem had requested to be transferred to a different galaxy entirely. Ryan had packed a lunch. "The key is to listen to the ground," he had explained while the others prepared their equipment. "It makes different sounds before it explodes, sort of like how ice creaks before it breaks, but with more sulfur." He had walked across the valley eating a peanut butter sandwich, pausing occasionally to change direction when the ground made what he described as grumpy noises. Behind him, the full military expedition had followed his path exactly, their equipment useless compared to what Ryan called paying attention. Day 7 had been the forest of aggressive trees, where the local plant life had evolved past photosynthesis and into active predation. The trees could move their branches fast enough to impale passing creatures, and the undergrowth was collectively hostile in ways that violated several laws of botany. The standard approach required flame units, chainsaw teams, and enough firepower to level a small city. What they got instead was Ryan asking if anyone had a pocket knife he could borrow. "I just want to get a cutting from that one," he had said, pointing to a tree that was actively trying to stab a passing bird. "It would look great in my apartment back home." When Dr. Finn had explained that the tree was trying to kill the bird, Ryan had nodded thoughtfully and said that his grandmother had roses that were similarly aggressive, and you just had to show them who was boss. He had walked into the forest like he was visiting a public park. The trees had attacked him exactly once, received what could only be described as a very firm talking to, and had then left him alone for the rest of the expedition. He had emerged 3 hours later with several plant cuttings, a pocket full of interesting seeds, and a detailed mental map of the safest paths through the forest. By day 10, the other trainees had started following Ryan around like ducklings, not because they trusted his judgment, but because staying near him seemed to be the only way to avoid having the planet actively try to murder them. "I don't understand it," Dr. Finn confided to her personal log. "Human Ryan approaches every lethal scenario as if it were a minor inconvenience. Yesterday, when we encountered the electric eels in the Screaming River, he asked if anyone had brought fishing line. The Screaming River had been the worst challenge yet. The water was home to creatures that looked like electric eels but were the size of subway trains and generated enough electricity to power a small city. The current was strong enough to sweep away a tank. The water was acidic enough to dissolve most metals, and the whole river screamed constantly with the voices of everything that had ever died in it. Standard crossing procedure required a portable bridge, full electrical insulation suits, and a support team with emergency medical facilities. The operation typically took 6 hours and had a 15% casualty rate even under ideal conditions. Ryan had looked at the river for approximately 30 seconds, then started taking off his boots. "What are you doing?" Commander Thal had asked, his scales now permanently stuck on the color that meant impending doom. "Going for a swim," Ryan had replied. "Water looks fine. Bit noisy, but I grew up near a highway. The water will dissolve you." "Nah, it's not that acidic. See how it's not eating through the rocks on the shore? That means it's probably just mildly corrosive. Like swimming in a chlorinated pool but with more screaming. The eels will electrocute you. Only if I bother them. Electric eels back home are pretty chill if you don't go grabbing at them. These aren't normal electric eels. Sure they are. Just bigger. Probably means they're older and more experienced, so they'll be smarter about avoiding unnecessary conflict." Ryan had waded into the water while his fellow trainees watched in horror. The massive electric eels had surfaced to investigate, taken one look at him and apparently decided he wasn't worth the effort. He had swum across the river in a leisurely breaststroke, pausing in the middle to wave at his teammates and point out what he thought might be interesting fish. The return trip had been even worse for everyone's nerves. Ryan had convinced one of the giant eels to give him a ride by offering it part of his energy bar. He had arrived at the far shore sitting on the back of a creature that could have powered half the galaxy, scratching it behind what might have been ears and discussing the river's ecosystem with the air of someone giving a nature documentary. "The screaming is just acoustics," he had explained when he rejoined the group. "All that electrical activity creates vibrations in the water, and the rock formations amplify them. It's actually pretty interesting from an engineering perspective." By day 14, Colonel Reeves had started sending daily reports to Galactic Command that read less like military assessments and more like appeals for psychiatric intervention. "Request immediate consultation with xenopsychology specialists," he had written. "Human subject continues to treat Class 9 Death World environment as recreational opportunity. Yesterday observed subject attempting to domesticate local predator species. When questioned, subject stated he was making friends with the neighborhood. Recommend full psychological evaluation of entire human species." The psychological evaluation had arrived in the form of Dr. Marina Santos, a human psychiatrist who had been hastily recruited from Earth's United Nations liaison office. She had stepped off the transport shuttle, taken one look around Mortis 7, and made the same comment that was becoming depressingly familiar. "Oh good," she had said, shouldering her backpack. "It's not as bad as I thought it would be." Colonel Reeves had stared at her for a long moment, then updated his report to Galactic Command. "Require immediate extraction. All human personnel display identical pathological lack of self-preservation instincts. Recommend reclassification of human homeworld pending further investigation." But the training program continued. Because somewhere in the galaxy, the Void Swarm was still a threat, and the Galactic Defense Coalition still needed soldiers who could function in impossible environments. What they were discovering was that they already had them. They just hadn't realized that the humans they'd been dismissing as a minor species had evolved on a planet that made Mortis 7 look like a vacation resort. Ryan Walsh, completely unaware that he was in the process of redefining galactic understanding of survival training, was sitting by the campfire he'd built using local materials, roasting something that looked like a cross between a fish and a small dragon, and planning tomorrow's activities. "I heard there's a volcano about 50 miles north," he mentioned to Dr. Santos. "Want to go check it out? I've never seen an alien volcano before." Dr. Santos, who had spent the day cataloging the various ways that Mortis 7 could kill its inhabitants, looked up from her notes. "Is it active?" "Yeah, that's what makes it interesting." She made another note in her file. This one about the apparent human instinct to seek out additional danger when the current environment wasn't quite challenging enough. Somewhere in the distance, a pack of phase bears howled in harmony with what sounded like a tornado made of electricity. Ryan looked up hopefully. "Oh good," he said. "Sounds like the weather's getting interesting." Murder Canyon earned its name the old-fashioned way, by murdering things. Located in the northern quadrant of Mortis 7, it represented everything hostile about the planet concentrated into one convenient location. The rocks were carnivorous, the air was poisonous, and the local ecosystem had evolved beyond normal predator-prey relationships into something that could only be described as competitive, Homicide. This is the final examination, Colonel Reeves announced to the assembled trainees. His nervous twitch had progressed to involve both eyes and most of his left cheek. 72 hours, minimal equipment, individual survival exercise. If you complete this, you graduate from the program. The equipment allowance was deliberately sparse: basic shelter materials, 3 days of emergency rations, a water purification device, and one personal item of their choosing. Standard military doctrine suggested that anyone attempting Murder Canyon should have a full support team, satellite communication, and emergency extraction capabilities on standby. Commander Thal had chosen a military-grade survival beacon as his personal item. His scales had achieved a color that didn't exist in any known spectrum and seemed to hurt people's eyes when they looked directly at it. Dr. Finn had selected an emergency medical kit and was breathing so rapidly through her apparatus that she was fogging up the inside of her helmet. Captain Vor's personal item was a portable weapons array, and his forearms were twitching independently in what his species considered a sign of extreme agitation. Lieutenant Kem had gone almost completely transparent and was humming at a frequency that made nearby equipment malfunction. Ryan had brought a fishing rod. "Human Ryan," Dr. Santos said. "Are you certain that's your best choice for survival equipment?" "Well, the briefing mentioned there was a stream running through the canyon," Ryan replied, checking his tackle box. "Figured I might as well try the local fishing while I'm there. Plus, if the water's clean enough for fish, it's probably safe to drink." Dr. Santos made a note that looked increasingly concerned. She had spent 3 weeks on Mortis 7 conducting psychological evaluations, and her preliminary report to Earth contained phrases like possible evolutionary divergence and recommend immediate anthropological study of human development patterns. "The stream in Murder Canyon isn't water," Colonel Reeves said. "It's liquid mercury mixed with dissolved uranium and what our scientists believe might be liquefied malice." "Oh." Ryan considered this. "Well, the fishing rod's still useful. Good for reaching things you don't want to touch directly." The drop-off point was a plateau overlooking Murder Canyon that offered an excellent view of why the place had such a terrible reputation. The canyon walls were lined with stone formations that moved when nobody was looking directly at them. The bottom was shrouded in mist that periodically screamed. The sky above the canyon was a different color than the sky everywhere else, suggesting that local atmospheric conditions had given up on physics entirely. "Individual drops will be made at random locations throughout the canyon," Colonel Reeves explained. "Your objective is simple: survive until pickup. Do not attempt to contact each other. Do not attempt to leave the canyon boundaries. Do not attempt to feed or domesticate the local wildlife." The last instruction was delivered while looking directly at Ryan, who seemed disappointed. Commander Thal went first, his environmental suit already running diagnostics that suggested imminent system failure. His drop pod disappeared into the mist with a sound like screaming metal. Dr. Finn followed, her breathing apparatus working overtime, and her medical training apparently warring with her survival instincts. Her pod vanished with what might have been a whimper. Captain Vor's descent was accompanied by the sound of his weapons array charging up, preparing for immediate combat. His pod hit the canyon floor with a thud that echoed off the carnivorous rocks. Lieutenant Kem's pod simply faded from view as it descended, her crystalline form apparently trying to phase out of existence entirely. "Last drop," Colonel Reeves announced, trying not to look at Ryan directly. "Any final questions?" "Yeah," Ryan said, settling into his pod with his fishing rod and backpack. "What's the local time zone down there?" "I want to make sure I'm up early enough to catch the sunrise, sire." Pod door sealed with a hiss that sounded distinctly like a sigh. Murder Canyon was everything the reputation suggested, and several things it didn't. The moment Ryan's pod touched down, the local environment began what could only be described as an aggressive welcome committee. The ground beneath his feet was warm and seemed to pulse with a heartbeat. The air tasted like copper pennies and existential dread. Something that might have been wind carried sounds that suggested the canyon was having a conversation with itself in a language made entirely of threats. Ryan looked around with the expression of someone seeing their vacation rental for the first time. It wasn't exactly what he'd expected, but it had character. The first order of business was shelter. The pod was designed to serve as temporary housing, but Ryan could see that the local rocks were already eyeing it with what appeared to be appetite. Better to establish a more permanent base before things got weird. He found a spot near what the briefing materials had optimistically called a stream. The liquid flowing through it was in Ryan's experience, natural water sources were usually associated with other useful things, even if the water itself wasn't immediately drinkable. The fishing rod turned out to be immediately useful, not for fishing but for testing things before touching them directly. The local rocks were indeed carnivorous, but they were also slow and appeared to have poor eyesight. As long as he moved predictably and didn't act like prey, they seemed content to ignore him. Setting up camp took about an hour. Ryan had learned to build shelters in environments that ranged from Arctic tundra to desert sand, and Murder Canyon was just another variation on the theme. The key was working with the environment rather than against it, and finding ways to make the local hostility work in your favor. The carnivorous rocks, for example, made excellent perimeter security. Anything trying to sneak up on his campsite would have to get past them first, and they were apparently territorial enough to attack other predators. The screaming mist provided excellent camouflage and background noise. The strange gravitational anomalies in certain parts of the canyon could be used for water collection if you knew where to place your containers. By sunset, Ryan had a functioning campsite, a reliable source of filtered water, and a basic understanding of the local predator patterns. He had also discovered that the liquefied malice in the stream was an excellent insect repellent when used in small quantities. Meanwhile, his fellow trainees were discovering that Murder Canyon had earned its reputation through dedicated effort. Commander Thal's environmental suit had suffered a complete breakdown within the first 6 hours. His emergency beacon was functioning, but the canyon's electromagnetic field was scrambling his signal into what sounded like a distress call, sung in 3-part harmony by a choir of dying robots. He had barricaded himself inside his drop pod and was rationing his emergency air supply while hallucinating conversations with his childhood imaginary friends. Dr. Finn's breathing apparatus had clogged with something that might have been pollen but moved, like it had opinions about the situation. She was experiencing what her species considered a complete psychological breakdown, compounded by the fact that her medical training kept trying to diagnose her own symptoms, while her survival instincts suggested that running away screaming might be the best available option. Captain Vore had engaged his weapons array against what he perceived as multiple hostile contacts, only to discover that he was fighting his own shadow, as interpreted by the canyon's unusual lighting conditions. His exoskeleton was running low on power. His ammunition was depleted, and he was beginning to suspect that the canyon was personally offended by his presence. Lieutenant Kem had achieved complete transparency and was communicating only in frequencies that caused mild headaches in anyone who tried to listen. Her tactical analysis capabilities had completely overloaded when presented with an environment where the normal rules of cause and effect were apparently optional. Ryan, unaware that his fellow trainees were experiencing various forms of survival-induced madness, was enjoying the most peaceful evening he'd had since arriving on Mortis 7. The local wildlife was certainly unusual, but it followed predictable patterns once you figured out the rules. The canyon's acoustic properties were actually quite pleasant once you got used to them, creating a natural sound system that was almost musical. He had caught something for dinner using his fishing rod and a piece of his emergency rations as bait. The creature looked like a cross between a trout and a small dragon, but it tasted like chicken and had no apparent interest in eating him back. The cooking fire was built using materials that burned with colors not found in any normal spectrum, but they produced good heat and kept the local scavengers at a respectful distance. As night fell over Murder Canyon, Ryan Walsh sat by his impossible campfire, writing in the journal he'd brought along to document his experiences. The entry for day 1 read, "Interesting local geology. Fishing is good. Should have brought marshmallows." Somewhere in the darkness, something howled with the voice of crystallized despair. Ryan looked up hopefully, wondering if it might be friendly. The emergency extraction call came at 0300 hours, 47 hours into what was supposed to be a 72-hour exercise. Colonel Reeves received it while staring at biometric readouts that suggested his trainees were either dead, insane, or had somehow transcended the normal boundaries of biological existence. Commander Thal's vital signs showed stress patterns that exceeded his species' known physiological limits. His heart rate had achieved frequencies typically associated with hummingbirds, and his brain activity suggested he was experiencing either enlightenment or a complete psychological break, possibly both. Dr. Finn's readings indicated that she had stopped breathing in any recognizable pattern and was instead producing what could only be described as aquatic sobbing sounds. Her stress hormones were at levels that should have been lethal, and her body temperature kept fluctuating between hypothermia and fever. Captain Vor's exoskeleton was transmitting error messages in 17 different languages, including 3 that his species had never encountered before. His biological signs suggested he was fighting a war against an enemy that existed entirely in his own mind, and losing badly. Lieutenant Kem had stopped registering on most sensors entirely. The few readings they could get suggested she had achieved a quantum state that allowed her to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, none of which appeared to be entirely in the same reality as everyone else. Then there was Ryan Walsh. His biometric readings showed that he was asleep. Not just asleep, but sleeping deeply and peacefully, with vital signs that suggested he was more relaxed than he had been at any point since arriving on Mortis 7. His stress hormones were at baseline levels. His heart rate was consistent with someone taking a pleasant nap. His brain activity indicated he was probably dreaming about something enjoyable. "Sir," the medical technician said, checking his instruments for the 3rd time, "I think there might be an error in the human's monitoring equipment." "What kind of error?" Colonel Reeves asked, though he was beginning to suspect the error was in their understanding of humans rather than their equipment. According to these readings, human Ryan's stress levels have been decreasing steadily since the exercise began. His body temperature is stable, his breathing is regular, and his brain chemistry suggests he's having fun. The extraction team found Commander Thal curled up in his drop pod, having constructed what appeared to be a religious shrine to his environmental suit's air recycling system. He was speaking in tongues and had covered the walls with mathematical equations that, when viewed from the right angle, might have been either profound insights into the nature of reality or really elaborate doodles. Dr. Finn was discovered attempting to perform surgery on a rock formation that she had convinced herself was a patient. Her medical training had collided with her survival instincts in ways that violated several principles of both medicine and physics. She was treating the rock for conditions that didn't exist while simultaneously trying to hide from her own medical equipment. Captain Vor was engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a shadow that moved independently of any light source. His 4 arms were moving in patterns that would have been impressive if there had been an actual opponent present. He had apparently defeated several other shadows earlier in the fight, based on his victory dances and the dramatic poses he struck between combat rounds. Lieutenant Kem was found in a state that could only be described as aggressively not present. She was visible but existed in a constant state of about to disappear, communicating only through color changes that induced mild seizures in anyone who looked directly at her. Her tactical assessments of the situation were being transmitted in mathematical formulas that described impossible geometries. Ryan was discovered sitting by a campfire that shouldn't have been possible, cooking breakfast and watching the sunrise. His camp was organized, clean, and appeared to be operating under different physical laws than the rest of Murder Canyon. The carnivorous rocks in his immediate vicinity had arranged themselves into what looked suspiciously like garden decorations. "Morning," he said cheerfully as the extraction team approached. "Perfect timing. I was just making coffee. Anyone want some?" The extraction team, all of whom were wearing full hazmat suits and carrying enough firepower to level a small building, stared at him for a long moment. "Sir," the team leader said carefully, "are you aware that you've been alone in Murder Canyon for 47 hours? Yeah, it's been great. Really peaceful once you get used to the local customs. Did you know the screaming mist is actually just thermal vents? Makes a sound like wind chimes if you listen to it right. Sir, this environment is classified as lethally hostile to all known forms of life. Well, sure, if you fight it, but most places are dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. This is just more honest about it than most." The psychological evaluation that followed was conducted by Dr. Santos, 3 xenopsychology specialists, a combat stress expert, and someone whose job title was apparently theoretical survival consultant. Ryan sat in the interview room, drinking coffee and answering questions with the air of someone discussing a pleasant vacation. "Ryan," Dr. Santos began, "can you describe your experience in Murder Canyon?" "Sure. Good fishing, interesting wildlife, excellent acoustics. The gravitational anomalies took some getting used to. But once you figure out the pattern, they're actually pretty useful. Oh, and the local equivalent of sunrise is beautiful. You don't see colors like that back home. Were you ever afraid?" Ryan considered this seriously. "Well, yeah, the first night I was worried I might have set up camp too close to the stream. The mercury content makes the soil a bit unstable, and I didn't want to wake up in a sinkhole." "What about the hostile environment? The carnivorous rocks? The screaming mist? What about them? Didn't they seem dangerous to you?" "Everything's dangerous if you don't pay attention. Cars are dangerous, but people drive them every day. The ocean is dangerous, but people swim in it. This place is just more upfront about the risks." The xenopsychology specialist, a crystalline being from the Arcturus system, made a sound like breaking glass. "Human Ryan, can you describe your homeworld's environmental conditions?" "Earth, pretty standard stuff. We've got deserts, mountains, oceans, forests, weather patterns, seasonal changes, the usual." "What about dangerous wildlife?" "Oh, sure. Bears, wolves, big cats, sharks, poisonous snakes, spiders, jellyfish. Australia's got some really interesting stuff. Drop bears, box jellyfish, blue-ringed octopus, funnel web spiders. Then there's the microscopic stuff like bacteria and viruses that can kill you without you even knowing they're there." The specialist's crystalline structure was beginning to crack. "And humans consider this normal?" "Well, yeah. I mean, you learn to avoid the dangerous stuff when you can, but it's all part of the ecosystem. Most of it won't bother you if you don't bother it." "What about natural disasters? Earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. Pretty standard geological activity. Oh, and avalanches if you're in the mountains. And flash floods in the desert. Blizzards if you're up north." The room fell silent except for the sound of several people updating their psychological assessment files. The combat stress expert was making notes that appeared to include the word impossible several times, underlined heavily. "Ryan," Dr. Santos said finally, "do you understand that the Galactic Defense Coalition classifies Mortis 7 as a Class 9 death world?" "Yeah, that seems about right." "It's definitely more challenging than most places. And you find it pleasant?" "Well, sure. Good exercise, interesting scenery, new experiences. Plus it's quiet. No traffic, no crowds, no pollution. Just you and nature." "Ryan," the theoretical survival consultant interrupted, "what classification would you give your homeworld using the same scale?" Ryan thought about this seriously. "I don't know the exact criteria, but probably somewhere around Class 13? Maybe higher if you count the really dangerous places like the deep ocean or active volcano zones. Oh, and space. Space around Earth is pretty hostile if you don't have the right equipment." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that usually preceded either applause or existential crisis. In this case, it was definitely the latter. "Excuse me," Dr. Santos said, standing up abruptly. "I need to make a call." The call went directly to Galactic Defense Coalition Command, where it was transferred immediately to the Office of Strategic Assessment, then to Xenobiology, then to Philosophy, then to a department whose official title was Things That Shouldn't Be Possible But Apparently Are. By the end of the day, Ryan Walsh's psychological evaluation had been classified as a galactic security document, and Earth had been quietly moved to a list of planets that the galaxy preferred to think of as theoretical, rather than actual. Meanwhile, Ryan finished his coffee and asked if anyone wanted to see the photos he'd taken of the local wildlife. The official suspension of the Galactic Defense Coalition training program came with a memo that was simultaneously classified as top secret and filed under educational disasters. Colonel Reeves's final report ran to 300 pages and included 17 different requests for psychiatric leave, early retirement, and reassignment to any location where the local environment operates according to recognizable physical laws. The memo announcing the suspension was brief. Due to unforeseen complications involving incompatible species psychology, the Mortis 7 training program is hereby terminated pending comprehensive review of participant selection criteria and environmental safety protocols. What the memo didn't mention was that half the participants were in intensive therapy, the base's entire supply of anxiety medication had been depleted, and the Galactic Defense Coalition's understanding of survival training had been fundamentally challenged by one human who packed lunch for extreme survival exercises. Ryan was sitting in what had been the base cafeteria, enjoying a sandwich and coffee, while the medical staff continued their efforts to restore his fellow trainees to something resembling functional awareness. Through the window, he could see the transport ships arriving to collect the remnants of what had once been the galaxy's most elite survival training program. Dr. Santos joined him at his table, carrying a datapad that contained preliminary findings from what was being called the Human Baseline Study. The study had been launched 3 days earlier, when someone in Galactic Command had asked the obvious question: if one human could treat a Class 9 death world as a recreational opportunity, what did that say about the rest of their species? "The results are in," she said, sitting down across from him. "Earth has been reclassified." "Oh?" Ryan looked up from his sandwich. "What's it classified as now?" "Class 13 death world. The scale only went up to Class 13 before yesterday. We had to create a new category. That seems a bit extreme." "Ryan, according to our assessment, Earth's environmental conditions include atmospheric electrical activity that can instantly kill most known life forms, predatory megafauna that hunt in coordinated groups, microscopic organisms that can cause system-wide biological failure, and weather patterns that regularly produce localized apocalyptic events." "You mean lightning, pack hunters, bacteria, and storms?" "Lightning that strikes the planet's surface approximately 100 times per second. Pack hunters that include apex predators with no natural enemies. Bacteria that can adapt to almost any environment and develop resistance to most known countermeasures. Storms that can level cities and spawn tornadoes with wind speeds exceeding most spacecraft." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, that's pretty much Tuesday weather in some places, but you get used to it." Dr. Santos made another note on her datapad. The psychological profile of humanity was turning into a document that read like a horror novel, written by someone with too much imagination and access to real statistical data. "There's more," she continued. "Our geological survey indicates that Earth's surface is constantly shifting due to tectonic activity, experiences regular volcanic eruptions, and is periodically bombarded by objects from space large enough to cause mass extinction events." "Well, sure. That's how planets work, isn't it? I mean, you need geological activity for mountain formation and soil renewal. Volcanoes are just the planet's way of recycling materials, and the asteroid impacts are pretty rare. Only happens every few million years or so. Ryan, most inhabited worlds in the galaxy are specifically chosen because they don't have those characteristics. That seems boring. It seems safe. Same thing." Dr. Santos showed him her datapad, which displayed a comparative analysis of planetary habitability ratings. Earth appeared on the chart as a small red dot in a section labeled "Theoretical Upper Limits of Survivable Conditions." According to this analysis, she explained, Earth shouldn't be able to support complex life at all. The fact that it not only supports life but has produced a species that considers its conditions normal is causing some significant revisions to galactic theories about evolution and adaptation. Through the cafeteria window, they could see Commander Thal being gently loaded onto a medical transport. He was stable now, but kept insisting that his environmental suit had achieved consciousness and was trying to communicate with him through status light patterns. Dr. Finn was walking under her own power but required constant supervision after attempting to perform emergency surgery on a lunch tray that she was convinced needed medical attention. Captain Four had recovered enough to argue with the medical staff, though his arguments consisted mainly of detailed tactical assessments of how to defeat various pieces of furniture. Lieutenant Kim was visible again but existed in a state of constant mild panic, as if she expected reality to stop working properly at any moment. "What happens now?" Ryan asked, watching his former teammates being loaded onto ships that would take them to medical facilities where they could recover from their encounter with basic human environmental tolerance. "Well, officially the training program is suspended indefinitely. Unofficially, there are some very interesting conversations happening at the highest levels of galactic government." "What kind of conversations?" "The kind where they discuss whether humanity should be classified as a potential threat or a potential ally, and whether there's actually a difference." Ryan considered this while finishing his sandwich. "Are we in trouble?" "No, actually. You're being offered a treaty. What kind of treaty? The kind where Earth becomes a full member of the Galactic Defense Coalition, with all the benefits and protections that entails. And in exchange, humanity agrees to help with the Void Swarm problem. What's the Void Swarm? Dr. Santos pulled up another file on her datapad. The image showed something that looked like a cross between a space jellyfish and a geometric nightmare, surrounded by what appeared to be the remains of several star systems. They're a hostile alien species that consumes entire solar systems. They've been expanding across the galaxy for the past 1,000 years, and conventional military tactics have been largely ineffective against them. The Coalition has been looking for new approaches to the problem, and they think humans might be helpful. Ryan, they just watched you treat a survival exercise that broke 4 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers as an enjoyable camping trip. The Void Swarm might be dangerous, but they're probably not more dangerous than Earth's weather patterns. That's a good point. When do we start? There's going to be a formal diplomatic process first. Ambassadors, treaties, cultural exchange programs. The whole thing. That sounds complicated. It is. But there's also been a request for an informal consultation first. What kind of consultation? They want to know if you'd be willing to look at some tactical data about the Void Swarm and give them your opinion on possible strategies. Ryan wiped his hands on his napkin and stood up. Sure, I can take a look. Do they have coffee where we're going? I'm sure they can arrange something. As they walked toward the transport ships that would take them to Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters, Ryan looked back at Mortis 7 one last time. It had been a good visit, even if it had ended earlier than expected. The local wildlife was interesting. The geological formations were unique, and he'd managed to get some decent fishing in. By the way, he said as they boarded the ship, I never did get to see that volcano I heard about. Is there any chance we could stop by here again sometime? Dr. Santos looked at him for a long moment, then made a note that she marked as priority. Discuss human recreational preferences with diplomatic corps before formal first contact. We'll see what we can arrange, she said. The transport lifted off from Mortis 7, carrying them toward a galaxy that was still trying to figure out what to do with a species that treated interstellar warfare as a logical extension of weekend camping trips. Behind them, the planet's screaming winds and carnivorous rocks continued their eternal hostility. Completely unaware that they had just failed to impress the galaxy's newest apex predators. In the ship's galley, Ryan Walsh found the coffee machine and started figuring out how to make it produce something that tasted like home. Outside the porthole, space stretched out in all directions, filled with new worlds to explore, new challenges to face, and new friends to meet. He was looking forward to it.
The alien historian said, "No one can read this." The human replied, "You're holding it upside down." The Galactic Archive spanned 17 full sectors, a monument built to house over 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge from 400 different civilizations. Its corridors seemed endless, illuminated by panels of cold light that highlighted display cases, sealed chambers, crystalline libraries, and data repositories with more memory than any organic mind could process in a lifetime. For most species, walking these halls was a near sacred experience. For others, it was an unbearable waste of time. But for Dr. Seti, it was home. Seti had served as chief historian for 3 full centuries, a span that for her species barely marked half of her adult life. In all that time, no unknown had lingered for long. Mysteries, anomalies, extinct languages, corrupted records. Nothing could stand up to the determination of Set and the analytical power of the archive for long. So the frustration produced by one particular set of finds had become almost a personal obsession, the tablets of the predecessors. Those polished obsidian slabs had been discovered on a dead world located at the outer edge of the outer belt, buried under kilometers of ice so old that even geological records could not date them with absolute precision. Their provenance was an enigma, and their age even greater. Preliminary studies had confirmed that they predated all known civilizations by at least 50 millennia. No artifact, no inscription, no structure recorded in the archive was of even comparable age. However, it was not their age that was most disconcerting. it was the markings etched into their surfaces. Elegant, undulating symbols ran across the tablets, moving with an almost hypnotic effect when the light fell on them at an angle. They were beautiful, they were incomprehensible, and not a single entity, organic or synthetic, had managed to interpret them. Linguists from 70 species, cryptographers with augmented brains, artificial intelligence matrices capable of processing 1 trillion connections per cycle, all had failed. The symbols followed no identifiable pattern, did not match any registered language family, and most frustratingly, they completely resisted the archive's decoding algorithms, considered among the most advanced in the galaxy. Each analysis ended the same. No correlation, no recognizable structure, no identifiable language. Dr. Seti went over those incomprehensible signs again, letting her crystalline fingers follow the curves and lines as if by mere physical insistence she could force them to reveal their secret. She had repeated that gesture thousands of times. The mystery, instead of vanishing, seemed to laugh at her. They represent everything the archive means, she murmured to herself. Knowledge, history, understanding, and yet they remain silent. The interruption came in the form of soft footsteps and a respectful tone. Dr. Seti. The voice belonged to Ambassador Kuroz, a member of a species that had only recently joined the Galactic Council 2 centuries earlier. His tone was polite, but it carried a hint of discomfort. The human delegation has arrived for your orientation, he announced. His optical sensors dimmed slightly, a gesture equivalent to an irritated sigh. Humans. The youngest species to join the council, not much more than a generation after achieving their first faster-than-light flight. They had caused quite a stir with their direct style, rapid expansion, and oddly aggressive way of solving problems. To Seti, however, the biggest drawback was that they were tiresome, talked too much, asked too many questions, touched everything, and seemed to have no regard for millennia-old protocols. Send them to the orientation chamber, he finally ordered. I will meet with them shortly. But Ambassador Kuroz's posture became distinctly uncomfortable, almost apologetic. I'm afraid they've already strayed from the course. I believe they're in the predecessor's wing. Of course they were. Seti left the main hall with a jerk, moving through the corridors until he quickly found them. 2 humans stood in front of the main predecessor's display. Their soft, strangely expressive faces reflected a mixture of fascination and energy. The woman, identified in the cultural database as Anna Chen, was a sinolinguist. The man, Jack Morrison, was listed as an engineer, though humans seemed to mix disciplines with a nonchalance that many species considered reckless. Anna peered at the larger tablet through the protective field. Fascinating, she said, leaning toward the gleaming surface. The symbolic density is extraordinary. There must be thousands of unique characters. Seti decided to intervene before they touched anything. Welcome, she greeted, letting her translator convert her clicks and harmonics into human standards. They have found our greatest mystery. Expression called a smile, a display of teeth that continued to bother many species on the council. 800 years, he repeated, that's quite a long time. No one can read this script, Seti Aldad said. We have determined that it may not even be real language, but some kind of decorative art. Some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. But Anna did not seem to be convinced. On the contrary, she began to walk slowly along the panel, analyzing each symbol with a concentration so intense that even Seti found it unsettling. And so began the event that would change the history of the archive forever. Anna continued to move in front of the main panel, following its surface with an almost surgical attention. Seti watched as the human moved her hands in small gestures, as if drawing invisible patterns in the air. Many beings did that when they thought, but hers seemed to have a definite purpose, an internal rhythm that accompanied each observation. Jack, meanwhile, examined the room with the nervous curiosity typical of his species, as if each device were a new puzzle. Anna stopped suddenly. "Dr. Seti," she said carefully. "May I ask how these tablets were originally discovered? In what orientation were they when you found them?" The historian had not expected the question. It was so basic, so elementary, that it was almost offensive. They were extracted from ice cores. The excavation team preserved their relative position, but not their exact orientation. She answered. She raised an eyebrow, a gesture that Setier found surprising. And that didn't seem relevant? The two humans exchanged a quick glance. That silent exchange of information that so many species found disconcerting. It was clear that they had reached a conclusion that Setier wanted to see. "We can see Tablet 7, Anna asked. "The one in the secondary chamber." The historian felt a wave of irritation course through her crystalline structure. Still, Council rules demanded full cooperation with delegates from member species. She motioned for them to follow her and led them to the climate chamber where the lesser slabs were stored. Tablet 7 floated in its suspension field, rotating slowly in the calibrated light that revealed iridescent reflections. Jack stepped closer to the control panel. Quote, "May I?" he asked. Seti barely opened his mouth to stop her from touching him, but it was too late. The engineer's fingers moved with surprising ease for someone who had never interacted with crystal core technology. He punched in commands with impeccable precision, halted the rotation, and began to turn the slab manually, changing the axis with calculated movements. Anna waited in silence, concentrating on the fragments that were coming into view. "Stop it," he ordered suddenly. The tablet hung upside down, its base positioned where it had previously been considered the top. Anna stepped forward, studying each stroke as if the lines had awakened from an ancient slumber. Seti detected a faint note of excitement in the human voice. "This is not an unfamiliar script," he whispered. "It is a recognizable pattern. Doctor, they have been holding it upside down." The silence that followed had an almost physical weight. The entire chamber seemed to stop. A flicker of disbelief ran through its internal processors. "Upside down," it repeated, unable to process it immediately. The concept of up or down is irrelevant in space. "We've checked every possible orientation." Jack shook his head softly. "They didn't check them with human recognition patterns," he said. "Let's demonstrate." He pulled out a portable holographic projector and activated the interface. A luminous replica of Tablet 7 floated between the three of them. With a gesture, Jack inverted the projection, and Anna began noting key points, intersections, repetitions, visual sequences. The change was immediate. Abstract lines took on structure. Entire groups were organized coherently. What had previously seemed a chaotic arrangement displayed an undeniable internal symmetry. Anna pointed to a set of long, curved symbols. "This is a pictogram," she explained confidently. "These are not letters, these are representations." Here she enlarged the image. "There is a simplified star map." This part moved her hand to another block, describing structures analogous to DNA. "And this segment represents a number system based on 12 units." CTI's breathing altered slightly, a rare phenomenon for her species. She couldn't believe it, but the symbols fitted this new interpretation. For the first time, he was seeing images where before there had been only chaos. "It's impossible," he exhaled. "Not so much," Anna replied respectfully. "Your algorithms were designed by species with very different modes of perception. You process space radially. The Borchi see in thermal spectra. The Centauri use compound vision. None of you think in terms of up or down, as we do, because those concepts don't exist in your home environments. Jack was already manipulating another terminal. The lights changed in several display cases in the hallway, a sign that he had sent a general reorientation command. "This is going to be interesting," she murmured, but said nothing. Her mind was too busy restructuring centuries of wrong conclusions. And yes, all this time in the nearby hallway, the sounds of rotation began to be heard. The suspension fields were readjusting the angle of the ancient tablets, turning them to the new orientation proposed by the humans. Seti felt an impulse she had never experienced before, a mixture of profound fear and absolute fascination. What was about to be revealed was not just a linguistic discovery, it was a colossal historical rewriting. The echoes of the rotation mechanisms ran through the entire wing of the archive. Seti took a few steps towards the main corridor, driven by the need to verify with her own sensors what until then had seemed like an absurd fantasy. The display cases began to light up one after another, a sign that the suspension fields were readjusting themselves according to the pattern suggested by Jack. Each tablet rotated with millimeter precision, adopting a new alignment that contrasted radically with the one used for 8 centuries. The first slab to stabilize revealed a set of symbols, which under the old orientation had seemed like a meaningless mass of curves. Now, before Seti's eyes, they were transformed into unambiguous shapes, simplified constellations, configuration routes. This was not abstract art, but scientific cartography. Jack, pleased with the system's reaction, returned to Anna. The engineer watched each new revelation as if he enjoyed witnessing the unraveling of a legendary mystery. Anna approached a newly oriented tablet and began to read the pictograms with increasing fluency. "This describes stellar movements," he explained. "There are chronological sequences here." And this section pointed to a denser set of symbols. "It looks like a historical record. I have no doubt. These inscriptions were meant to be interpreted visually, not phonetically." Seti felt her crystalline structure vibrate at the magnitude of the discovery. If Anna was right, and the evidence bore her out with outrageous clarity, the civilization that had created those tablets was not only the oldest ever documented, it was also the first to intentionally leave a record for those who came after. The historian forced herself to examine several more inscriptions. In one of them she made out an anatomical diagram, a bipedal figure with proportionate limbs and bilateral symmetry. It was not human, but the structure recalled a species with frontal vision. The proportions revealed a species designed to walk upright, exactly the type of writer who would have created a pictographic system dependent on vertical orientation. "It makes sense," Seti murmured. "It all fits into this new framework. The writing is based on the idea of up and down as a reference point." Anna nodded. Their civilization likely lived on worlds with stable gravity, sufficient to define fixed directions, and that reading depended on the natural visual angle of a bipedal observer. The intellectual impact was enormous. All the species that had studied the tablets so far operated in very different paradigms. Some had radial perception and saw space as an unoriented sphere. Others lacked any equivalent concept of horizontal. Those with compound vision interpreted the structure as mosaic patterns. None had a cognitive system that prioritized an absolute vertical axis. And then a nearby tablet finished its rotation. The room filled with a blue glow as the symbols appeared in completely different formations. Anna touched the panel and projected the enlarged details for everyone. "This," she said in a barely audible voice, "it describes the expansion of an entire civilization." Set stepped closer. The pictograms narrated in condensed form the rise of the predecessors, from their first settlements to the construction of interplanetary monuments. The figures depicted allied races, advanced technologies, and architectural structures that surpassed any known work of the Council. The star paths marked suggested that they had traveled the galaxy with extraordinary mastery, establishing code stations and possibly terraforming entire worlds. Here, Anna pointed out, was a record of knowledge transmission. It seems they left instructions, warnings, scientific references. They didn't want to disappear without a trace. They wanted to communicate with someone who could understand them. Jack, who had been watching from the sidelines, chimed in. This is what we call engineering documentation. No mystical symbolism. They just wanted to make sure that someone would one day be able to decipher all this. SETI froze. Her mind raced through the thousands of reports, debates, and conferences organized over the centuries to try to understand the tablets. The possibility that all this work had begun with a mistake as simple as assuming that orientation was irrelevant was both devastating and liberating. Suddenly, a larger tablet at the far end of the room completed its turn. Its surface lit up as if awakening. Anna stepped closer immediately. This fragment reads like a meta-historical record. It describes what they did and why they did it. SETI activated her internal reader to process each line. The predecessors had traveled hundreds of worlds, seeded life, preserved ecosystems, built colossal structures to protect young species. Their ultimate intention was clear: to spread knowledge. The tablet concluded with a pictogram depicting a bipedal figure pointing to the stellar horizon. They wanted to be remembered, Anna said solemnly. She refused to answer. The magnitude of this revelation went beyond the historical. It was a redefinition of the purpose of the archive. For the first time since her career began, the historian felt as if she was understanding a truth that had lain buried for tens of thousands of years. Jack crossed his arms in satisfaction. I guess it just needed a different perspective. SETI knew she was right, and this was just the beginning. The transformation of the predecessor's wing became increasingly evident as the tablets finished being rearranged. What had seemed like artistic chaos for centuries was now beginning to form a coherent narrative. Panels that had once seemed decorative now displayed maps, molecular structures, sociocultural descriptions, and visual representations of forgotten technologies. Each new tablet became a window into a civilization that had once been considered almost mythical. SETI walked down the corridor with slow steps, analyzing each depiction that emerged. Her mind, accustomed to cataloging, comparing, and deducing, worked at a pace that was almost unimaginable. Frantic, the archive had accumulated information for millennia, but it had never imagined that the greatest breakthrough in its history would be born from such a basic mistake. It was humiliating, yes, but also profoundly revealing. Anna examined one of the newly configured display cases. The tablet displayed diagrams that appeared to depict an energy system based on the manipulation of gravitational fields. It was not a complete design, but it was clear enough to discern advanced theoretical principles that surpassed even the technology of the modern council. Look at this, she said, pointing to a circular pattern divided into segments. They indicate energy levels, interferences, temporal cycles. The predecessors not only documented their science, they also recorded their experimentation. SETI stepped closer to analyze the diagram. The precision was remarkable. It showed not only results but also cross-references to other sectors of the pictographic archive, as if each tablet formed part of a unified system of knowledge. Suddenly he began to understand the methodology of this culture. Their language was not linear, but visually integrated. Each piece could be understood on its own, but its true meaning emerged when connected to the others. Jack, for his part, worked at an advanced terminal synchronizing the newly decoded records with the central database. I'm generating correlations, he explained. If these tablets form an integral whole, we can reconstruct their original order. He felt a pang of astonishment. For 800 years, experts from hundreds of worlds had tried to establish a chronological and thematic order among the pieces without success. Now, thanks to the correct orientation and annotations, humans, the links began to appear with mathematical clarity. The symbolic network illuminated like a star map that had finally found its coordinates. A new slab finished its rotation. Its surface showed a mix of elongated shapes and more angular symbols, clearly different from those seen before. Anna reacted with a slight start. This is a demographic record, she deduced. Here they represent population growth, and these lateral marks could indicate important events or mass migrations. The figures seemed to move from region to region, forming patterns that repeated themselves throughout the visual sequence. SETI also noticed a recurring symbol, a set of converging lines that possibly indicated an exodus or a historical transition. It was the first time anyone had managed to interpret such a clear narrative element on the tablets. If this is correct, SETI commented, the predecessors did not simply travel the galaxy. They settled, abandoned worlds and returned in extended cycles. Their history is more dynamic than we imagined. Anna nodded, and they recorded each step, presumably so that their descendants or any future civilizations could learn from their successes and mistakes. Jack continued to manipulate the data, and a three-dimensional grid projected itself into the air. It was a preliminary model of the possible reading order of all known tablets. The structure formed an ascending spiral, with each level representing a different era in previous history. The structure formed an ascending spiral, with each level representing a different era in previous history. If we continue, he explained, we will be able to reconstruct the entire original archive. SETI was speechless. The magnitude of what they were achieving surpassed any This reconstruction was accurate, then the humans had just unlocked the legacy of the oldest civilization in the galaxy. But what came next surpassed even that revelation. A tablet of exceptional size, prominently displayed, finished its spin. Its contents glowed brightly as it reoriented itself, as if it had waited millennia to be properly viewed. Anna ran toward it without hesitation. Doctor, she said firmly, this is a direct message. SETI zoomed in on the surface with her reader. The symbols showed figures pointing to the sky, structures that resembled interstellar bridges, and a set of pictograms depicting outstretched hands. It was an invitation, an opening, a call to whoever could read them. They wanted to make contact, SETI whispered. Not just record their history, they were leaving instructions for us. Quote. Jack approached in disbelief at the clarity of the message. This meant that they knew they would disappear and wanted to make sure someone found their legacy. Anna added, and that someone could continue what they started. SETI felt a shiver run through her crystalline body. For the first time, the mystery ceased to be an obstacle and became a bridge. A bridge that had remained closed for 800 years until today. As the entire wing continued to reorient itself, the atmosphere in the archive changed palpably. A few minutes before, the tablets had been silent relics. Fragments of knowledge that had remained in the dark for millennia. SETI watched as researchers from other species began to arrive from nearby areas, drawn by the internal alerts announcing changes in historical settings. Some froze as they saw the new images. Others, in disbelief, tried to check the data with their own devices, but no mind seemed to process it as quickly as Anna and Jack. The two of them humans moved between the panels with an energy that belied the traditional restraint of the archive. Anna translated the pictograms in real time while Jack adjusted the interfaces to integrate them into the main preservation system. Within minutes, the data synchronization revealed a growing map of connections between tablets, as if the history of the predecessors were being pieced together layer by layer. One newly oriented tablet immediately caught Anna's attention. It showed interlocking lines that seemed to trace purposeful routes. This fragment describes the interstellar migrations the predecessors undertook during their expansion, she explained. Here they mark seeded worlds, here temporary colonies, and these symbols indicate populations that moved for environmental reasons. SETI studied the map. The routes were not chaotic. They followed calculated patterns that took into account resources, climates, orbits, and gravitational positions. It was a level of planning that surpassed most modern civilizations. They understood the galaxy as a living system, the historian said. They moved to maintain balance, not just to conquer territory. Ahead, another tablet revealed a series of engineering diagrams. Jack paused before it, his eyes shining almost childishly. Doctor, these depict orbital stabilization structures. It's an incredibly efficient design. I can't be sure without further analysis, but it appears more advanced than our own gravitational locking technologies. Seth examined the pattern. Sure enough, the schematics demonstrated an extraordinary mastery of astrophysical forces. If the Council could interpret these concepts correctly, they could improve dozens of critical infrastructures, from research stations to inter-system bridges. It was clear that the predecessors had been no ordinary civilization. Their legacy was richer and more complex than anyone had imagined. Then, one particularly ornate tablet finished its rotation. Its surface, more polished than the others, cast a deep sheen that made the lines appear to shift as the viewer changed angle. Anna stepped closer immediately. This appears to be a cultural record, she reported. There are depictions of rituals, community structures, and symbols that could refer to life cycles. The figures depicted communities gathered on circular platforms, events that appeared ceremonial, and signs indicating different ages within their society. The predecessors valued the transmission of knowledge, not just through science but also through shared traditions. SETI regarded the tablet with keen interest. They transmitted identity through collective memory, he mused. Each generation received a portion of the legacy that had come before. Meanwhile, Jack began to connect this information to the three-dimensional model he had generated earlier. The web of data took on new depth. Science, history, culture, migrations, engineering, all were woven together, an architecture designed to be understood holistically. The more we analyze, Jack said, the clearer it becomes that these tablets are chapters of a complete work. Anna added, and it seems that they had been prepared so that any civilization with vertical visual perception could understand it. SETI felt an internal shudder. Up until that point, the Council had assumed that ancient cultures wrote in a manner comparable to modern ones or that their thinking was incompatible with current cognitive systems. But the predecessors had thought much further ahead. Not only did they record their history, they encoded it to be deciphered by future discoverers, not for a specific species, but for anyone who shared certain perceptive traits. And then, as the revelations continued, the widest panel of the wing, a slab that had always been considered purely ornamental due to its chaotic design, finished fitting. The surface lit up with an intensity that caused several researchers to step closer. Anna activated a projector to zoom in on the details. The scene showed a group of figures pointing at a stellar horizon accompanied by symbols representing temporal cycles, discontinuities, and cosmic events. But there was something else, a central pictogram depicting a species reaching out to another that did not yet exist. It was an invitation, a projected greeting to a future civilization. This is an intentional message, Anna said. There is no doubt about it, it is an open statement of their purpose. Quote, Jack read the connections quickly. It indicated that they shared knowledge to keep their discoveries from being lost. They ensured their legacy would survive, even if they did not. He felt a mixture of pride and bewilderment. The entire archive, their entire life dedicated to preserving knowledge, found new meaning in the realization that a civilization so ancient had pursued the same goal, to be understood, even across unimaginable gulfs of time. "They were waiting for us," she whispered, and for the first time since her career began, she felt that they were not the guardians of the past, but its inheritors. The new orientations finished propagating throughout the wing. The central archival system, detecting the enormous variation in patterns, activated an analysis protocol that had not been used in centuries. Data cores generated secondary projections along the corridor, automatically integrating the newly deciphered elements. The information that had previously been a borderless puzzle was now beginning to fit together with surprising coherence. Set stopped in front of a series of medium-sized tablets that had just been reconfigured. Their surfaces displayed linear diagrams that seemed to describe complex biological processes, reproductive cycles, morphological adaptations, mutations calculated to resist gravitational shifts. It was clear that their predecessors had studied and understood an impressive diversity of organisms, not just their own. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. They documented entire species with a precision that surpassed our genetic databases. Anna looked at the pictograms from another angle. "They didn't do this just to record their biology, it looks like a preservation manual. Perhaps they were trying to prevent extinctions during their migrations." Jack moved closer to examine the symbology. "Look at this pattern," he added. "It describes how to maintain the genetic stability of small populations during long journeys. This kind of knowledge could transform our colonization programs." Quote. As they spoke, another nearby terminal projected a complete sequence of newly interpreted symbols. The system had detected a narrative pattern spanning multiple tablets and was now displaying it in a logical order. It was the first time in history that an archive module had managed to generate coherent text from this collection. The sequence revealed the early expansion of the predecessors. They had begun on a single world, moved out to nearby systems. Over time, they had extended their influence to regions so far away that no stellar records existed to match their original cartography. During their rise, they had built research centers, temples of profound cultural significance, and structures that seemed to function as beacons of information distributed throughout the galaxy. "It was as if they had woven a web of knowledge," SETI commented. "A web destined to survive even when their civilization was no longer present." Anna scanned the projection with a mixture of awe and utter concentration. And each core of this web contained fragments of their history, their science, their identity, so that any species capable of understanding their visual language could piece it together. Jack added, "Designed as cultural redundancy. Even if one world was lost, the others would retain the pieces needed to rebuild their legacy." The room vibrated slightly as the archive integrated new correlations. The larger tablets at the far end of the corridor began to illuminate symbols that had not been visible before. SETI stepped closer, unable to contain her anticipation. One of them showed a detailed depiction of a monumental structure, a spherical tower comprised of multiple levels, surrounded by what appeared to be power generators. Anna examined the pictograms surrounding the figure. "This depicts an intergalactic communications node," she said firmly. "If I interpret it correctly, it was capable of transmitting information on vast timescales, far beyond what any current council system could handle." Jack leaned in for a closer look. "If we could replicate this, even partially, communication between distant sectors would change completely." He nodded at that idea. This civilization had not only traveled the galaxy, they had built technologies designed to connect worlds on scales that modern species could barely imagine, and they had left the blueprints for anyone who could read them to see. An adjacent tablet revealed a poignant scene, several bipedal figures gathered in a circle holding what appeared to be memory crystals. The symbols around them described an event that was part of the social fabric of the predecessors. It's a ritual, Anna deduced. They shared knowledge ceremonially. It wasn't just information, it was part of their identity as a species. SETI watched the scene in silence. For centuries, she had believed that preserving knowledge was a cold, mechanical task, based on disciplined accumulation, but now she saw that the predecessors understood it as a communal act, something involving bonds between generations. They loved their legacy, she whispered. They didn't just protect it, they lived through it. Jack chimed in. I think that explains why they left such detailed instructions. They wanted their ideas to continue to exist even when they could no longer pass them on in person. Anna stepped back, contemplating the collection as a whole, and for 800 years no one could see it because they were all looking for patterns that fit their own ways of perceiving. The predecessors had designed a system that could only be understood from a vertical, frontal viewpoint. It wasn't an impossible puzzle, it just needed the right eyes. SETI closed her eyes for a moment, as if processing a discovery that was reshaping her very identity. For centuries we believed ourselves to be the guardians of ancient knowledge, but we were missing the point. Only now are we beginning to see what they truly left behind. The light of another tablet caught their attention. This one showed figures seemingly traveling toward a dark region of the star map. There were no marked routes, no signs of return. Anna frowned. This part could represent their demise, she deduced. Not a catastrophe, but a voluntary retreat. Perhaps they knew their cycle was ending. A deep shudder went through her, and that was why they left the tablets behind, to make sure their voices were not lost in the void. Jack finished the idea so that someone would find them and continue what they could not. The three of them stood in silence for a few moments, watching the history of an entire civilization unfold before them as if awakening from an eternal sleep. The archive was no longer silent, and the humans had just opened the door. The room was no longer a simple exhibition space. With each tablet correctly oriented, the entire wing seemed to take on a life of its own. The air vibrated with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and respect. Deep inside, SETI, who for centuries had walked these halls feeling nothing but silent frustration, now saw history unfold with overwhelming clarity. As more fragments were rearranged, the more evident it became that the predecessors had designed it all as a deliberate legacy. This was no scattered collection of artifacts, but a carefully constructed work designed to transcend time. The civilization that had created them had seen beyond their own existence, leaving instructions for those yet unborn. And for 800 years, every species on the council had missed the simplest message. It had to be read from a specific perspective. Anna stood before the tablet that chronicled the predecessor's retreat, examining the symbols with a focus that made it clear she understood the responsibility that now fell upon them. This final segment, she said, shows how their culture chose to depart from the known galaxy. There is no evidence of collapse, no sign of war or disaster. It was a calculated transition. Jack scanned the margins. It seemed they wanted their memory to become a guide. They did not seek to be revered, but understood. SETI took note of every detail. The final pictograms showed a succession of figures looking to the sky, accompanied by a set of lines that seemed to represent astronomical cycles. Gigantic. In them there was no longer a physical presence of the predecessors, only their legacy. They abandoned the material, SETI reflected, allowing only their knowledge to remain. Anna turned to her, and now it is up to us to decide what we do with it. It was not just a matter of deciphering the symbols, it was an explicit invitation to continue the vision that the predecessors had begun. To expand knowledge, to preserve it, to share it. It was essentially the same purpose as the archive, but understood for the first time with true depth. The central system then projected a complete map of the wing, integrating each tablet into a unified structure. The entire collection formed an ascending spiral that symbolized continuous progress. At the center of the model, several prominent tablets form the conceptual core: cosmology, biology, migrations, engineering, culture, and a final message that acted as both closure and opening to the time. Jack let out a silent breath, impressed. This is monumental. There is nothing else like it in the galaxy. Anna added. And it was all before us. All we had to do was look at it the right way. SETI looked at the entire spiral. For the first time in her existence, she understood that the archive was not meant to simply accumulate information, but to transform it, reinterpret it, revitalize it as new species brought different perspectives to the table. The predecessors had understood this millennia before. Cognitive diversity is not a hindrance, but a key. The galaxy should not look at the past through the eyes of a single species, but with the sum of all possible points of view. Ambassador Cures, who had returned after hearing of the commotion, stopped beside them. His expression reflected bewilderment, but also fascination. Dr. SETI, the Council has already been notified. They want an immediate report. They say this could be the most significant discovery in our history. SETI nodded slowly. For the first time, she felt no pressure, only determination. She knew what she had to say. We will report to the Council, she said, but not just about the translation, but about what it means for everyone. She turned to Anik. This finding demonstrates that the human perspective can contribute something no other species has ever considered. You have achieved in minutes what countless minds could not in centuries. Jack shrugged, a gesture that to his species signified unabashed modesty. Sometimes the trick is simply looking at something from a different angle. Anna smiled.